All right, you apes, you're going to be taking out the railgun. This is Track Bits. After my top 10 awesome scores to crappy movies episode, I was asked what exactly the golden age of soundtracks was in reference to my description of Debney's Cutthroat Island. In short, it corresponds roughly with the golden age of Hollywood, and I bet that most of you could probably identify scores from that period purely from the style of sound. Big, sweeping, and orchestral, and oh how I love it when those words pop up together, combined with a lack of subtlety that most folks see as old-fashioned, the music of the Golden Age began with the advent of sound and film, and ended, depending on who you ask, in either the late 1950s or early 1960s. One of the big factors in Golden Age music was the often direct influence from classical composers of the time. Of the big duo of the Golden Age, Max Steiner and Erich Wolfgang Korngold, the former received tutelage from both Johannes Brahms and Gustav Mahler, while the latter gained the attention of Mahler and Richard Strauss. This foundation of classical forms and sensibilities in movie score writing continues into this day with such composers as John Williams, but really got its start in the Golden Age. The Vienna-born but ultimately American Max Steiner was almost scarily prolific, penning the scores to hundreds of films, including such screen gems as King Kong, Casablanca, and Gone with the Wind. Though a musical prodigy and composer from a young age, it wasn't until the beginning of World War I that Steiner moved to New York from England and started a career as a musical director, arranger, orchestrator, and conductor of Broadway productions, moving to Hollywood in 1929 to do similar work for RKO. His score for King Kong in 1933 put him on the map, and is noted for being one of the first extensive scores for an American movie, which up till this point usually consisted of minimal score and plenty of arranged public domain music. Also a musical prodigy, what the Austrian Erich Wolfgang Korngold lacked in quantity he made up for in quality, scoring, among others, a slew of Errol Flynn swashbucklers including The Adventures of Robin Hood, Captain Blood, and The Sea Hawk. Korngold's foray into film scoring was a lucky thing, for he had barely left Austria for California when Anschluss kicked in and Austria was annexed to the Third Reich. Korngold, of Jewish extraction, vowed to cease composing classical pieces, but not movie scores. He had to pay the bill somehow, until Hitler had been defeated. True to his word, and slowly becoming disillusioned with the Hollywood system, his first classical work after the end of World War II was his only violin concerto, which featured themes from a number of his film scores, and is still played in concert halls to this day. But Korngold and Steiner weren't the only ones composing during that period. Other notables include the Connecticut-born Alfred Newman, who also featured a long list of compositions including The Robe, The Mark of Zorro, and The Prisoner of Zenda. And New Yorker Bernard Herrmann, who is most well known for his music to many a Hitchcock film, but also remembered for his work on Citizen Kane and the fantastical Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Now, here's where things get a little fuzzy. There are some absolutely stunning works in the late 50s and early 60s, a good amount by the Hungarian Miklos Rozsa, who wrote some amazing music for the historical epics Quo Vadis, Ben-Hur, The King of Kings, and my personal favorite, El Cid. Punctuated by, among others, Maurice Jarre's sun-drenched score to Lawrence of Arabia in 1962. The thing is, some folks end the Golden Age around 1955 or so, lumping all the scores after that as the beginning of the Silver Age. Given how robust these scores are, and their very clear roots in the grand style of Steiner and Korngold, others, myself included, identify them as the last of the Golden Age, with the endpoint being 1963. Everyone agrees that from 63 on we're definitely in the Silver Age, but it's that spot in the middle where some contention is raised. That Golden Age sound would occasionally surface in the years following, like John Scott's score to Antony and Cleopatra in 72. But would never really achieve the glory found in the scores of the previous era. The Silver Age itself puttered around for roughly 2 decades, with composers such as Jerry Goldsmith making decent hits here and there, and the end of the age came in 1977 when this familiar tune graced the ears of moviegoers. Yes, John Williams broke the lull with Star Wars, harkening back to the grand old classical roots of themes and variations, a staple of the Golden Age. Everything after Star Wars could safely be called the modern age of film scoring, but some folks subdivide even further, labeling 77 to the mid-80s as a Bronze Age, and after that the Digital Age with the advent of CDs. However, my research didn't carry me this far, so don't take my word for it. I'll finish out this episode with 2 new terms you might find useful with recorded music in general, wet and dry. All these 2 terms mean is how echoey the music sounds, with wet describing the sort of natural echoing noises you get from a concert hall or church, and dry being a more minimal sound, like a recording studio. This recording of my voice you're hearing right now is very dry, as my microphone is subpar and my room not very large, while live recordings of musical groups tend to be wet sounding, as they're usually recorded in a large venue. Each descriptor has its pluses and minuses. Dry recordings can sound crisp and precise, but also feel small and, well, dry. Wet recordings, on the other hand, make music sound bigger and more grand, but can also sound muddled and imprecise with too much echo. Here's an interesting anecdote involving the principles of wet and dry, though not having so much to do with where something was recorded than how many people were involved. The movie Back to the Future. When Alan Silvestri recorded the music to the first movie, he only had access to a small amount of performers. A handful of brass and wind players and a small string ensemble, the out-of-time orchestra was only a few steps away from community symphony in terms of size, but what the group lacked in sound, they made up for in pacing, and the familiar quick tempo of the main theme was possible because it was easy for such a small amount of players to be precise, which led to a more dry-sounding recording. The original score to Back to the Future wasn't released for nearly 2 decades. It was only last year that the full soundtrack was finally made available, and in the interim, folks at Varie Sarabande commissioned John Debney and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra to perform selections from the first 2 films, and throw in some original recordings from the third. Debney faced a problem when conducting the main theme, however. The RSNO is a full-fledged symphony orchestra, much bigger than the small group Silvestri worked with for the original recording. If Debney conducted at the original speed, it would be much harder to keep all the performers together. This is no slur against the RSNO. Staying together and sounding good in general is like a 3-legged race but with 100 people tied together. You can only go so fast before things start to look a bit messy. As such, Debney decided in favor of sound clarity, and slowed the tempo of the main theme down in order for the very wet sound produced by these 100 musicians to ring clear. The downside is that Debney's recording lacks a bit of the verve that the original had, but makes up for it in a fuller sound. Whether or not you like Debney's choice is a matter of taste. Personally, I've heard Silvestri's recording so often that the rambunctious performance of the out-of-time orchestra is what I hear when I think of the score, and Debney's recording feels languid in comparison. I can't deny the fuller sound, but I prefer the original. So there you have it, 2 new terms and a brief overview of the golden age of soundtracks. I'd like to give a hearty thanks to Christian Clemenson for his help in getting the basic facts on the golden age, and for his highly informative website, filmtracks.com, which I admit I pilfered from a bit for the second part of this podcast. Till next time, soundtrack fans, you're going to be infiltrating the radar train.